Hello, welcome to the Edwin Music Matters, and today I'm going to talk about how to identify a consecutive fifth in your harmony. Well, in my previous lesson, I talked about how to sneak in these consecutives in your harmony because a good harmony requires that you obey the rules of progression, and in this case, you should ensure that from your first chord to your next progression of another chord, you ensure that you do not have consecutives. And here I'm talking about consecutive octaves and consecutive fifths. But because today I'm specifically talking about consecutive fifths, well, how do they sneak in? If you have 2 5 3 chords or two root position chords following each other, then there's a likelihood that you are going to incur these consecutives. And why are they considered bad in harmony? However much some scores have adapted them, but their characteristics of being empty, hollow, makes them not good for a four-part harmony. Now, here's the reason why they are bad. These consecutives make your harmony to develop an open consonance or what is called a perfect consonance. What do I mean when I talk about open consonance or perfect consonance? This is a situation whereby the resolution of your harmony ends in one sound or a three-part. So your harmony sounds not independent, it sounds empty and it is not stale. Whereas a good harmony requires you to have a progression that is still, that is full. The notes sound fully initiated and the parts sound independent. So to our example of today, you can look at my screen. I have some chord progressions and I have 3 bars. This is the first bar, the second bar, and the third bar. In my first bar, I have labeled it as A, and the second one is B, the third one is C. The first bar has a bad progression. That means there must be some consecutives somewhere which we are yet to identify. My second bar has a good progression. That means I must have eliminated these consecutives. We are going to see how. And my third bar has repeated notes, and in bracket I have indicated there no consecutives, and we're going to talk about these. Why do we talk about no consecutives when we have repeated notes? Well, back to our first bar. I have 2 root position chords. The first chord, this chord here, is a root position chord in C major, and the second chord is a root position chord in A minor. Now remember, I said if you have 2 root position chords following each other, there's a likelihood that you're going to incur consecutives. Let us see. If we look at the interval between the leading note of the soprano and alto, the interval do not form a perfect fifth. So let us look at the interval between soprano and tenor. That as well do not form a perfect fifth. The interval between soprano and bass parts, they form an octave. We shall see the next progression if the interval between the bass parts and soprano parts will form another octave in the second chord progression. We have not yet seen a perfect fifth anywhere. Let us look at the interval between alto and tenor. There is no perfect fifth. Interval between alto bass, no perfect fifth. Let us look at the interval between tenor part and the bass part. They form a perfect fifth. because the tenor is a perfect fifth just above the root. Remember, the chord is in root position. So this interval between the tenor and the bass is a perfect fifth. Let us look at the second chord. The interval between tenor and bass parts also form a perfect fifth, because this is a root position chord, and this is the root of a chord in A minor, and this note in tenor is a perfect fifth just above the root. So the progression from the first chord to the second chord has two fifths. These two progressions have consecutives, and the consecutives are consecutive fifths because there is no octave between the soprano part and bass parts in the second chord. Therefore, we only have one bar consecutive. We have a consecutive fifth between the bass parts and the tenor parts in the first bar. So this is a pad progression. Now, how do we resolve this progression? Let us look at the second bar. Now, in my second bar, it is bar B. What have I done to remove the fifth that was following each other? Now, this first chord, this is my first chord, it is still in root position. The bass parts and tenor parts are forming a perfect fifth. But in the second part, I have decided to let the bass parts and tenor parts move in a contrary motion. You can see the tenor is moving upwards, the tenor is ascending, the notes are ascending, while the notes in the bass are descending. So the tenor and the bass parts are moving in a contrary motion. Now, when you have a contrary motion in top parts, there is no way you are going to have these consecutives easily. If you look at my first progression in the first bar, the motion between the bass parts and tenor parts are moving in one direction. They are moving in a parallel direction. Now, this is bringing an effect of parallelism. Now, the parallel motion and the movement in fifths bring that effect of consecutives, that is lessening the quality of the chord progression. Now, in my second bar, I have decided to remove the tenor note from E, and the tenor now has ascended to A, so that my bass parts and tenor parts form an octave. So I have achieved this by doubling the root of the chord in A minor, so that my progression from the first chord to the second chord do not end up with the consecutives. However, if you look at the alto parts and the tenor parts, they form a perfect fifth. Now, someone may wonder if this as well form consecutives. If you look at the alto parts, this and this, the alto parts and the tenor parts, in the first chord, they do not form a perfect fifth. But in the second chord, they form a perfect fifth. So that is a good motion. But the motion in the first chord between the bass parts and the tenor parts, there is a perfect fifth. However, in the second chord, the bass parts and the tenor parts do not form a perfect fifth. So in this chord, there are no consecutives, because the perfect fifth between the bass parts and the second perfect fifth between the tenor parts and the alto parts are occurring in two different parts. Remember, consecutives are considered bad in harmony when they occur in the same two parts of your harmony. But in this case, in the second bar, they are in two different parts, so they don't form consecutives. So bar 2 has a good progression. compared to the first bar. The last bar, bar C, we have two root position chords in C major. The chords have been repeated, the notes have been repeated. If we look at the interval between the bass parts and the alto parts, they form a perfect fifth. The interval between the tenor parts and the alto parts also form a perfect fifth. The same notes have been repeated in the second chord. The alto parts and the bass parts, this part and this part, they form a perfect fifth. The tenor part and the alto part in the second chord also form a perfect fifth. Now, someone may wonder if this is a bad progression or are these also consecutives? No. Consecutives are only considered when the chords move, when the chord progression changes. If you have repeated notes, then the consecutives are not that bad. I want to play this in a music software, Noteworthy Composer, so that we can listen to the quality of harmony in the first bar and in the second bar. I have opened it in Noteworthy software so that I'm able to play the notes. Listen to the first bar where we have a bad progression because of the consecutives occurring in the bass parts and tenor parts. The harmony sounds not that strong. It sounds as if it's a 3-part or a 1-part. There is no powerful identity of the 4 parts of the harmony. You can listen to it once more. But we have resolved the problem in the second bar by making the tenor and the bass parts move in a contrary motion so that we eliminate the consecutives. Now, this bar has a good progression and it sounds very powerful. The harmony has identical identity and it resolves to a powerful progression. The progression is very powerful. You can hear some practical identity that is very strong, a harmony that is very enhanced, a progression that is very enhanced compared to the first progression. Listen to the first progression carefully. Then the next progression that has been corrected and solved. Very powerful. In my last bar, I have repeated notes. So when you have repeated notes, the progressing chord sounds just as the initial chord because the notes have just been repeated. So there's no problem of these consecutives. So remember, as you always do your harmony, keep checking for these consecutives. Sometimes the consecutives can be difficult to see. They can be hidden or exposed. And that brings me to open or exposed consecutives and hidden consecutives that I'm going to talk about in some other lesson. If you are interested and if you are very happy with this lesson, kindly like, comment, subscribe, and share.